loss and muscle loss. And so we do exercise to combat that. At least 5 days a week, and maybe 6 or 7, about an hour and a half of straight exercise, each of those days. And we're doing a lot of research to understand, because we're kind of good subjects for studies like this. We have a pretty clean medical history, and so we don't have maybe a lot of other medications that we're taking, so it's a little easier to understand, because it happens so fast, the story of both bone loss and bone regeneration. Cardiac function. I probably did, I don't know how many stress tests that I've done in the last, 5 years or so. So how many 4-hour cardiac MRIs and, 12-hour Holter or 24-hour Holter monitor, 24-hour blood pressure monitoring, all those kinds of things to understand how does my heart work down here, and what happens to it up there when suddenly it's not working against gravity. It kind of decays a little bit. The heart muscle actually loses mass, and so it doesn't work the same way, and it's actually a parallel for aging, and so we can understand a little bit more about cardiac function by going to a laboratory like space. Next. And just the osteoporosis kinds of things. I actually came back with basically 0 change in my particular bone density. That's the only bone density I can speak about, and the results are still TBD, but 0 is a pretty astounding number, and it's partly due to a new exercise machine that seems to target weight-bearing muscles, and it's partly due perhaps to a common osteoporosis drug that I took, and people are still sorting out those results. There's people who go up there and don't take the drug but do the exercise. There's people who go up there and do both, like myself, and trying to understand some of those parameters is really useful. Next. Just a little bit about living in space. I mean, it's a lot easier and sometimes a little harder than you would think. I mean, people think the hair washing and hygiene. I get a lot of questions about a shower. My 11-year-old was thrilled to know he would never have to take a shower in space, ever. But, it is inconvenient, but we just take sponge baths. It works out just fine. We wash our hair. It works out just fine. Next. And, a little fun stuff, too. I'm a flute player. I'm not a professional flute player. I just like to play. I play with other astronauts in a band where we try to make sure we earn the babysitting money. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And I think a lot of people in this room might remember a band called Jethro Tull. And Ian Anderson is the first flute player to bring the flute to rock and roll. So he and I did a duet between Earth and space. And this is Ian Anderson on the ground, and myself. Next. Hair cutting. And notice this little attachment here. As all the little hairs are coming off, we need to have a vacuum attachment to catch them. Next. This is how I feel about the food. Okay? I was actually a little pleased. I mean, nobody goes to space for the food. It looks terrible. It tastes pretty good. You get so at first you're trying everything, and there's a lot of different kinds of food. There's a 9-day menu, and it repeats every 9 days. And, you get a little tired of the food, and at the same time, nobody goes for the food, so it all works out. We craved pizza and food that had some kind of texture. We have a lot of dehydrated food that we add water to, and a lot of meals ready to eat like the Army uses. A lot of those as well. Next. This picture to me epitomizes how hard it is to just deal with too many things up there. If you have more than 3 things that you're trying to hold on to, I mean, one under each armpit and maybe one between your toes, I mean, now you're floating around the cabin with things all clamped down and no way to actually really hold on to anything. So it's a challenging environment, but it's also pretty fun. Next. This is a crew eating dinner together. Next. And, I love this. I mean, it's just very fun. But it's some of the magic, it's the magic of, living in a weightless environment. It's a giant fluid physics experiment, eating. You can actually take your spoonful of chicken soup and you can yank the spoon out and then have the soup and go like this. But, it's just pretty interesting from a physics standpoint. Some of the experiments that we do are actually quite simple, but they can't be done down here. Next. Next. I wanted you to pay attention to the table here. Notice it's horizontal. We all used to fly from this end of the station through to the Russian end of the station, and we would all at one point or another, be hitting that table and get little bangs and bruises from it. And then Paolo, who just thinks about these things, Paolo from Italy, realized that it didn't matter if the table was horizontal or not, because nothing was going to fall off it. In fact, nothing's going to stick to the table unless you Velcro it or tape it or bungee cord it down. And so by putting our table down at a lower profile, gave us a place to still gather around and be together for meals, but we didn't all bang into it all the time. Next. And this is the crew that is leaving. They're up there right now, and they'll be leaving at Thanksgiving. This is the crew that came home in September. Next. And just showing you stuff and how it's tough to manage stuff. Most of our stuff comes in these suitcases that are sort of cloth suitcases. Next. A lot of different kinds of experiments that we were talking about. Looking at the Earth, we'll see that in a minute. Growing plants. A lot of really interesting experiments that we can do in this enclosed glove box. Next. The medical experiments, they have worthy and lofty goals, but I will tell you, it's not pretty. And it's a lot of work for everybody on the ground and up in space as well to wear all this stuff. Although in some ways, any of you who have ever worn any of those monitors and feel like those boxes are sort of dragging you down, up in space, I could wear all that stuff at once and none of it even, it just kind of float with me. It was pretty fun. Next. This is me doing some VO2 max studies to understand cardiac function. Next. It would take me actually about a day. It could take me a couple hours to set this up, an hour to do this test, and then an hour to put everything away right. There's a lot of logistics associated with doing science experiments up there because you can't just shove things in a drawer. You've got to make sure that they're all sort of tied down. Next. The bathroom. We'll get to that maybe later. We'll see. Next. Looking at the quality of the water. Next. Fix in some of the experiments. Next. And this is just a few more pictures of this supply ship right here. This is the Japanese supply ship, and so it's coming up to the space station, hovering there, and then Paolo and I together, I was on the controls, and he's like the watching person who is telling me, okay, 1 meter, half a meter, 3 pins, like the pin that we're actually going to grab, and trying to make sure that we don't actually accidentally push too hard instead of just grabbing this thing. And so it was it's something we've only done twice on the space station. We've done it a lot on the space shuttle. When you think about the Hubble Space Telescope, capturing that, the space shuttle would come right up to it. There, the Hubble would be hovering, and they'd reach out with the robotic arm and grab it. Well, if they make a mistake, or the Hubble somehow turns wild, they can just back that space shuttle away. It's not a problem. But our space station is so big and so bulky, and we can't afford the fuel use either, that it's hard to move that thing away. And so we have to be a little more constrained in how we actually grab things like that. Next. It weighs, a couple thousand tons. Next. And then we put it onto the space station. Next. And I didn't get to do any spacewalks. We were pretty disappointed. One of those alarms that rang in the middle of the night, so it was a really scary one where you look and, a lot of lights are out in the station, and we're just happy that the computer is still running on its batteries, and we look at the computer and just see what's going on. And Scott, who was the commander at the time, turns around to us and he goes, "It's S0, yes!" Meaning a really big electrical box that is going to need replaced outside with a spacewalk. And then it turns out that they had a spare out there already, and they just had to reroute the power and the data. We're disappointed. Next. But this is what it looks like for spacewalking. You're in your own little spaceship, and you've got quite a view. Next. When we attach new modules, what that physically looks like. This is our new big closet, so to speak, that was so essential for having the space station be able to continue until 2020 at least as a place that we can live and work and do experiments that help show us what we need to learn. We're learning things we need to know in order to go on to places like Mars by stopping at asteroids first, going back to the moon. There's still a lot of lessons about people and equipment that need to be learned. Next. Next. And I like to show in this picture because it shows you here's the European supply ship that's attached. Here's the Russian segment. Here's the U.S. segment. That's where, right within this little place here, and it's about from here to there, is the treadmill and the toilet and the weightlifting machine and the cupola that we look out of and take pictures. The American segment, European